Welcome back to our weekly video podcast. We've only been doing this for a few years, so we're still
can't figure out what we're doing.
It is. Well, you all know that, but thank you for watching anyway and giving us the grace to tune in to this conversation. I'm Steve Autrey, pastor at Denver United Methodist Church, alongside my good friend Paul Thompson, who is the pastor at Huntersville United Methodist Church. We're continuing this series called #Influence that is about how does God shape us? How does God communicate to us? How do we experience God? Basically, again, how does God influence us to shape us into the people that God calls us to be? So this past Sunday, we talked about, well, that which is at the heart of our faith, the real life person of Jesus Christ. And what it means to be his follower and to experience him every day. Not just to make him into an historical figure that is in the history books, but someone who's actually part and parcel of what we do day in and day out.
So how did it go at Denver, talking about Jesus?
Well, rare topic. Oh, no. We
I know they usually talk about you every Sunday. But
something like that.
Maybe gave Jesus a shot this Sunday.
I did give Jesus a shout out for a change and stop talking about myself. No, I think that just to get back to the heart, sometimes we can drift away from our core. And it is easy. Everybody, every organization can experience institutional drift, and the church can do that too. And so we have to be reminded where our focus is and our identity is.
Yeah. So at Huntersville, I like the idea that Jesus connects with us, and the scriptures point out that Jesus was both a prophet, priest, and king. And if you're going to think about the ways that Jesus influences, one, his words, coupled with his actions, of course, but his words, prophetic in the truest sense of the word. Jesus only could speak for God. And so Jesus did speak for God. Priest, the idea that Jesus is the one person who can connect us to God through both his atoning sacrifice, but also the love of God, the grace of God in Jesus Christ. So that was big. And then king, this idea that one day we will worship truly a king who has been coronated on God's throne forever and ever. And oddly enough, it's a lamb. You know, that's the picture in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, one that's been slaughtered.
The one that's been slain. And so just the odd
and the
juxtaposition of that.
The prophet, priest, and king, those are all great ways to think about Jesus. But I think there's also another title that's in there. In John, when he says, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. And, you know, that old hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, we probably sang that a lot. But do we really understand? I mean, friendship with Jesus, what does it mean to be a friend, to have a friend in Jesus? That means, to have friendship, you actually have to interact with each other.
One of the real blessings that I've been able to have through the years with some counseling and with some group counseling, and that is this idea that in prayer meditation, literally to sense that, for me, it's sitting by a brook or a creek, and literally sitting there with the sun coming in, just the warmth, and truly believing that Jesus is right there sitting and listening as I pour out my heart, my feelings, and that has always been a great experience for me, to be able to really believe that Jesus is with me.
And I think that is so helpful, but it also can be hard to get our minds around. But what we believe this week, and this is a segue, in case you're wondering, that Jesus does have a physical body at work in the world, and that is the church.
And Steve and I had a little bit of conversation ahead of time, and we are both people who have been shaped by the church. We are products of the church. In some ways, we are caretakers of the church, leaders in the church, and at the same time, I think I can look and say how times that I've been disappointed by the church and hurt by the church. And I'm going to suspect for many of you that's the same thing. So this is both a a time for us to celebrate and give thanks to God for this beautiful gift called the church, and also to look at it and go, wow.
Yeah. Well, and it is a curious thing that Jesus would leave this holy, crucial, the most important work that's been handed over to creation to human beings.
Wow.
And not just any human beings. Think about the first 12. Well, one of them, went bad, had to replace him.
Even make it past the...
Yeah, even when Jesus is physically present, even before the crucifixion, Judas goes off the red. Judas loses it. He goes astray, and that may be an indication to us that it's not always going to be perfect.
And it certainly is not. I like to think, and I told Steve earlier, some of my absolute earliest memories of my life are in church. I grew up in this church that was a lot of family, and my mom and dad sang in the choir, so I sat with someone who, she was not a real aunt, but she was a cousin that I called her Aunt Melrose. And to this day, I can sit there and remember, I can remember sitting there with Aunt Melrose, rifling through her pictures, trying to find something to write on in the pew seated next to her, and just that real sense of family connection that I experienced in the church. For me, that's always been a model and a way I think about church. It is family. Mm-hmm. It is those deep bonds of love and connection. And at its best, church certainly is that.
And the parts of church that I remember most as a kid would be the times of fellowship. Mm-hmm. That idea of what's the word in the New Testament, koinonia, just the fellowship, the living out life together, and being shaped by each other.
I think in a previous culture era, for me, church really was synonymous with your social life. Church was, of course, your spiritual life, and often most of the activities that you did were centered around the church. Don't sense that is the case as much for people anymore.
Yeah, I think that church becomes one option among many, especially in the social realm. And it's like, well, I'll go to church if I don't have anything else going on. That happens a lot. And I think you can see that in attendance patterns. Used to be, to be considered active in a church, and Pew Research Center does a lot of this stuff on religion. What was it? 3 out of 4 Sundays, or 3.5.
In a bygone era.
In a bygone era. Now, it's probably around 1.6 Sundays a month is someone's considered to be active in their church, and that was before COVID. So my guess now is many people think are in the one or less than one time a month on average coming to church. And we see that. I mean, we get a sense of that, and you know how the jokes go about Christmas and Easter, right? Mm-hmm. Christmas Eve, we all kinds of services, Christmas Eve services. We'll bring in 850 to 1,000 people in for worship on Christmas Eve here. Easter, we'll blow it out. But then what happens the Sunday after Easter? Mm-hmm. So there's something about, now I've drifted way off course here, but there's something about the culture no longer makes church relevant. It used to be a cultural assumption that you would be in church.
And one of the real difficult things for me is, one, I don't believe going to church particularly makes you Christian.
No.
For some, I've heard it said, and kind of worry about it sometimes, that the meanest people in the world attend church on Sunday, and then.
But yet it is the church that is the mechanism for Christ to exist in the world. So while going to church and showing up to church may not necessarily make you Christian, just like if I go and sit in a new car lot doesn't make me a new car. Right.
Or go to a ball game make you an athlete.
No, I wish it would. Coming and sitting in the pew is not necessarily going to make you a Christian. But one thing that's certain is we were never designed to live the Christian life apart from the church.
Right.
It's not a solo exercise. It's not just me and me only. And you see that modeled from the very beginning. Jesus doesn't just ask one person to follow him. He calls a community because they're going to need each other. They're going to need to argue with each other at times. They're going to need to love each other at times. They're even going to need to fight with each other at times in order to carry out the work of the gospel.
Yeah, so we've introduced the topic today, and tomorrow we're going to bring in a special guest for the next couple of days who will certainly help maybe redeem our conversation around church, as we've kind of started off on a little bit of a negative tangent, but we both love it and also recognize it for what it was. We look forward to talking with you more
absolutely.
tomorrow.
And we promise it will get better.
Thanks.